When Sigma announced their brand new 35mm f1.2 DG-DN art lens towards the end of 2019, I've got to admit, I was pretty excited. I currently own the Sigma 35mm f1.4 for my Sony A7 III, and it was actually one of the first lenses I purchased for it when I switched over from Canon to Sony. And before that, I even owned a copy of this lens for the Canon 5D Mark III that I used to own. So to finally have a copy of this 35mm f1.2 version to try out means that today is a very happy day for me. Well, hopefully, I mean, obviously it depends if it's any good or not. But anyway, the main thing that makes this f1.2 variant different from the f1.4 is that, like all of the DG-DN lenses that have followed it, this lens was designed from the ground up specifically for full-frame mirrorless cameras, unlike the 1.4 that was originally designed for DSLRs, and then Sigma just bolted a bit on the bottom to make it fit mirrorless cameras. And because it was specifically made for mirrorless cameras, Sigma have suggested that this lens is seriously impressive in terms of image quality. So this week, I'm going to put it through its paces and find out exactly what this thing is capable of. I've got to start off by giving a big thank you to Sigma for letting me borrow a copy of this Sigma 35mm lens, though I must be clear that I do unfortunately have to give this lens back at the end of the testing, and that does mean that this test is totally independent. I'm not being paid by Sigma to make this review or anything, and all of the opinions expressed in this video are my own. Anyway, let's start off by taking a look at some of the specs of this lens. This lens comes available in both Sony E-Mount and L-Mount for Panasonic and Leica cameras. However, in this test, I'll be using an E-Mount copy attached to my Sony A7 III. As many of you may already be aware, if you're interested in this lens, this is not a cheap item. On Amazon, you can pick it up for around £1,350, or that equates to about $1,450. It's also fair to say that this thing is a chunky motherfucker too, weighing in at 1,080 grams or 38.1 ounces, and it's predominantly made from metal and hard plastics. Size-wise, it's much bigger than its f1.4 sibling, but although it feels noticeably bigger and heavier when mounted to my A7 III, I wouldn't really say it feels ridiculously front heavy, which is nice. The 35mm f1.2 has a manual aperture dial which can be declicked using the switch on the side of the barrel to allow the dial to rotate smoothly, and this might be a feature that's really handy for videographers who prefer to use the aperture value to adjust their exposure and they want to do so without clicking through each of the stops. Instead, you can do it in one nice smooth motion. This manual aperture dial can be also switched to automatic mode, which is noted by an A marking, and this will allow it to function like a standard lens where you can adjust the aperture setting using the back of your camera. However, one gripe I do have is that this thing does not include a lock switch to keep this dial fixed into auto mode. Now, this means that the dial can quite easily be knocked from auto mode onto a different aperture setting altogether in your bag or whilst it's hanging by your side from a camera strap or something like this, and it can get a bit annoying. Although Sigma have addressed this issue with their most recent prime lenses, including the 85mm f1.4 and the 105mm 2.8 macro, both of which have a lock switch, it is a bit of a shame that this is not a feature on this lens, and I can only hold out hope that one day Sigma will update this design to include a lock switch. Also on the side of the barrel, there's an MF to AF switch, as well as an AF lock button which can be customized to function as a shortcut to a host of camera settings. As you'd expect from Sigma, this lens mount is made from metal, which is nice, and there's also a bit of weather sealing present here in the form of a rubber O-ring that'll help to prevent some of the dust and moisture getting into the camera body. Another noticeable difference between this brand new 35mm and the older f1.4 version is that the new one uses a focus by wire AF system, whilst the f1.4 variant utilizes a traditional focusing mechanism. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later on during testing. Okay, enough of the specs. Let's go ahead and see how this lens handles in terms of image quality. When shooting wide open at f1.2, the edges are noticeably darker due to some rather heavy vignetting, and as you'd kind of expect with a wide-angle lens, there is a fair bit of barrel distortion at the edges too. However, it is worth mentioning that with the most recent versions of Photoshop and Lightroom, they do have a lens correction profile for this lens specifically. So when you open up your RAW files in either piece of software, you should see that these lens issues are corrected automatically. And to be fair, it does do a pretty good job of fixing it. It's not perfect, but it's totally usable. If we zoom into the middle of this lens chart, even when shooting wide open, we can see that this lens is nice and sharp, and there aren't any signs of chromatic aberration either, which is really good. At the corners, things start to soften slightly, but it's still not a bad performance. There's also a touch of chromatic aberration starting to peek through, but again, there's really nothing to complain about here. So with this lens chart providing some pretty impressive results so far, I decided to head out early one morning with my friend Hannah to really test this lens out in the field. Overall, I was really impressed with the results of this lens. Even when shooting at f1.2, the focus was really sharp and the fall off creates a really pleasing separation between the subject and the background, even when shooting full length portraits. The bokeh in the background is nice and smooth. I mean, it's not the smoothest bokeh I've ever seen, but it's actually not bad, and you really wouldn't be disappointed with the results that it provides you. Sticking on the topic of bokeh, in our bokeh balls test, this lens creates nice round orbs in the middle, though these do rapidly transform into that cat's eye shape as they near the edge of the frame. When shooting at a moderate distance from my subject, this lens was able to work flawlessly with both face and IAF on my Sony A7III. However, I did notice that when shooting close up, the AF would occasionally behave a bit erratically. While shooting, I could just hear the AF motor whirring constantly as if it was really battling to keep focus. Anyway, back at the studio, we started doing some more AF tests, this time without IAF or face detect, and we found that the AF was actually really quick when shifting focus between near and far subjects in really good lighting conditions. In the low light test, the good performance continued. The AF didn't struggle at all, despite the room being very dimly lit. Switching over to video mode, and the AF was okay when the subject was further away. However, as the subject neared the frame, the AF kind of loses track a little bit and then jumps into focus at the last minute. This was also the same result when we did the test at a faster pace too, so not a fantastic performance from this lens. As we mentioned earlier, this lens uses a focus by wire AF system, and that means when you switch it over to manual focus, the focusing is a little bit inconsistent, as you can see by this example here. Now, this may not be such a big deal for photographers or videographers who prefer to use their camera's AF to focus, but if you're a videographer who prefers to rely on manual focus to gain sharp focus, then this could be a bit of a deal breaker. In terms of AF noise, this thing is pretty damn quiet. There is a slight whirring if you listen really closely, but it's nothing that you would notice in real life scenarios. Okay, so with all of the testing complete, it's now time to slap a verdict on this puppy. Pooh! Ow. So let's go through each of the pros and cons of this lens and see where we land. In terms of price, there's really no escaping the fact that this is a bloody expensive piece of kit. But I kind of guess that's what you get for having a lens with a super wide aperture of f1.2. However, that said, for your money, you are getting a very nicely put together lens, so full marks for build quality. In terms of handling, yes, it's a bit of a girthy boy. All right. But to be fair, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. For me, this lens is kind of teetering on the edge between being well balanced and just a bit too front heavy, but it's just within the limits of being okay for a full frame body in my opinion. On an APS-C body though, just fucking forget about it. It's just way too big, don't even go there. Image quality, as we've seen, is very good. Nice sharp images with no significant signs of chromatic aberration, so that's a big pro. For photography, the AF performance is generally pretty good. It's very quick to focus, though on my copy I did have that slight issue where focusing up close with IAF kind of caused it to jib out a little bit, but in my mind that's not really a deal breaker. For videographers, however, the AF is really less than perfect, especially if the subject is moving towards the camera, and annoyingly you don't even have the manual focus option to fall back on because of the stupid focus by wire system it uses. I don't know why they've chosen that. So friends, with all of this in mind, is this actually a good lens? Well, the answer is yes. It is a very good lens, it's just very expensive. But would I personally consider buying this lens? That is definitely a tougher question to answer, and being completely honest here, I don't think I can give you a full decision on that without first testing it against my current 35mm f1.4 to see whether or not, for the money difference, it's a significant improvement. Luckily for you guys, that's exactly what I'm going to be doing in my next video, so be sure to join me next week where I'll be comparing the Sigma 35mm f1.2 against the Sigma 35mm f1.4, and we're going to find out whether or not this new version is superior or not. In the meantime though guys, if you've enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel, because every interaction you have with this video helps, and I honestly really do appreciate it. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. In terms of price, there's no escaping the fact, oh, bogey.